In the previous lesson, we learned how to control overflowing content using different overflow values. We learned overflow visible, overflow hidden, overflow scroll, and overflow auto. And those properties controlled overflow in both directions at the same time. But now here's an important question. What if you only want to control overflow in one direction? What if you want scrolling from left to right, but not from top to bottom? Or from top to bottom, but not from left to right? That is exactly why CSS gives us two more properties, Overflow-X and Overflow-Y. Now let's understand what they mean. The x-axis represents horizontal movement. That means left and right. So Overflow-X controls what happens when content overflows horizontally. In other words, when content becomes wider than the available space. Now, the y-axis represents vertical movement. That means up and down. So Overflow-Y controls what happens when content overflows vertically. In other words, when content becomes taller than the available space. In this lesson, we are going to explore both Overflow-X and Overflow-Y using a single image container. Now, you might wonder, why are we not using a text box for this? The reason is simple. Text normally wraps to the next line, so it does not clearly show horizontal overflow. But images behave differently. When an image is larger than its container, it overflows in both directions, horizontal and vertical. That makes it the perfect example for understanding overflow control. But before we apply any overflow properties, let's first create the problem. We are going to increase both the width and the height of the image. This is important because we want the image to be larger than the container in both directions. So now the image is overflowing horizontally and vertically at the same time. At this point, we have not added any overflow control. We are simply observing what happens when content becomes bigger than its container. Now this is where CSS becomes powerful. Because instead of controlling everything at once, we can control each direction separately using Overflow-X for horizontal overflow and Overflow-Y for vertical overflow. Now let's continue. Instead of using Overflow Scroll, use Overflow-X Scroll. But wait, if you look at your screen right now, you might notice a strange trap. Even though we only typed Overflow-X Scroll, a vertical scrolling behavior still appears. Why? By default, the overflow property of an element is visible. But when we start using the separate properties, Overflow-X and Overflow-Y, things behave differently. If you only set one of them and leave the other one blank, the browser may no longer treat the other direction as truly visible. Instead, it may behave like auto. And that can introduce scrolling behavior that you were not expecting. This is why many developers make it a habit to set both Overflow-X and Overflow-Y together. Now, you might be thinking, can't I just fix this by typing Overflow-Y visible?